Jared Bridegan was murdered. Henry Tenen murdered Jared Bridegan. Let me say that one more time. Jared Bridegan was murdered. And he was murdered by Henry Tenen. There will be no dispute to those facts. No doubt. Mario Fernandez had no desire to murder Jared Bridegan. Mario Fernandez had no motive to murder Jared Bridegan. Mario Fernandez did not benefit from the murder of Jared Bridegan. Simply put, ladies and gentlemen, Mario Fernandez had no involvement in the murder of Jared Bridegan. And that is what we believe the evidence will show. I'm going to take a moment to walk you through the law, the elements the state of Florida must prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and a timeline with details of what we anticipate the facts will show, and why at the conclusion of this case, we're confident in asking you to return a verdict of not guilty. Ladies and gentlemen, the first charge in the indictment, murder in the first degree. As to count one, to prove the crime of first degree premeditated murder, the state must prove the following three elements, but actually they will only have to prove two. Element one, Jared Bridegan is dead. There is no dispute and no doubt to that element. The death was caused by the criminal act of Mario Enrique Fernandez-Saldana. We anticipate there will be no evidence to support that whatsoever. Henry Tenen murdered Jared Bridegan. Element three, there was a premeditated killing of Jared Bridegan. The evidence will show that Henry Tenen had a premeditated killing of Jared Bridegan. The state mentioned, they said Henry Tenen is the shooter. There will be no dispute to that fact. So they will seek to prove this case by claiming that Mr. Fernandez is a principal to first-degree murder. That instruction that the court will provide you is that if Mario Enrique Fernandez-Saldana helped Henry Tenen commit a crime, the defendant is a principal and must be treated as if he had done all the things the other person or persons did, if the state proved beyond a reasonable doubt the following two elements. Number one, that Mario Fernandez intended Jared Bridegan to be murdered. And number two, that Mario Fernandez did some act or said something that was intended to and that did incite, cause, encourage, assist, or advise the other person or persons to actually commit the crime. To be a principal, the defendant does not have to be present when the crime is committed. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard Ms. Stifler. You will never hear a witness in that witness stand, see a text message or an email, any communication between Mario Fernandez and Henry Tenen intending that this crime be committed, inciting, causing, encouraging, assisting, or advising Henry Tenen or any other person to commit the crime of murdering Jared Bridegan. Second charge, criminal solicitation to commit a capital felony, to wit, first-degree murder. In essence, to get to the first charge, you have to go through the second charge. As to count two, to prove the crime of criminal solicitation, the state must prove the following two elements beyond a reasonable doubt. Mario Enrique Fernandez-Saldana solicited Henry Tenen to commit an offense prohibited by law, to wit, first-degree murder. And solicit means to ask earnestly or to try to induce another person, Henry Tenen, to engage in specific conduct. And number two, that during the solicitation, that Mario Enrique Fernandez-Saldana commanded, encouraged, hired, or requested Henry Tenen to engage in specific conduct which would constitute the commission of first-degree murder or an attempt to commit first-degree murder. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the evidence the state has to put forth to you. They have to prove each of those elements, just like Mr. Dreiser said in jury selection when he gave a hypothetical about the links in a chain. And if none of those links are actually established, then the whole chain falls apart. That's what we believe the evidence will fail to show, are those links in the chain. Now, Ms. Stifler started this case, and she ended her opening statement with her statements of why we are here. We're here because a man was murdered by Henry Tenen with his child in the car. There's no doubt about that, and it's terrible. But I give credit to Ms. Stifler. She was correct. When you retire to that deliberation room, you have to leave a lot of your own human emotions here in this courtroom. The judge will provide an instruction, rules for deliberation. These are important. It's asking you to do something that's not natural. But I want to touch on a couple of those. I think it'll aid in the process of the next 2 weeks. This case must be decided only upon the evidence that you have heard from the testimony of the witnesses and seen in the forms of exhibits and evidence in the instructions that the court will provide. This case must not be decided for or against anyone because you feel sorry for anyone or angry at anyone. Your verdict should not be influenced by feelings of prejudice, bias, or sympathy. Your verdict must be based on the evidence and the law contained in these instructions that the court will provide you. What that means is you will be angry. You will have sympathy. You will feel sorry. There are victims on both sides of this courtroom, outside of this courtroom, around the country, quite frankly, around the world. Like when you retire to that deliberation room, you cannot allow the sympathy, sorry, and anger to influence your decision. Now, ladies and gentlemen, no need to read this slide. This is just an illustration that there is a lot of history between these people. And it starts April of 2010. Shanna Gardner and Jared Bridegan are married. 2 years later, they have twins. You've heard that one of those has a medical condition that'll likely come into evidence throughout the next week and a half, 2 weeks. And then in February of 2015, Shanna Gardner files for divorce in St. Johns County, where they resided at the time, and a number of months later, they were divorced. The state made a point to tell you that the evidence is going to suggest that this was a nasty divorce, nasty custody battle. We believe the evidence will show you the opposite, that they resolved their divorce by what's called a consent final judgment. For those of you lucky enough not to have gone through that process, that means that they reached an agreement by consent of both parties, including their custody. In Florida, they call it time sharing. That it was equal on both sides. 2017, Jared Bridegan marries Kirsten Bridegan. The state said that there was short courtships. You'll see that that is somewhat of a theme, short courtships and fast marriages. That doesn't mean that they're not valid marriages. The state would want you to believe that the evidence is going to suggest that Mario Fernandez and Shanna Gardner had a marriage of convenience. Sometimes marriage is convenient. And you'll see that Mario Fernandez will be a good stepfather and that he'll do an equal role. That's what the evidence will show. But once these parties were married, now with two separate households, co-parenting these twins, you're going to hear it wasn't always perfect. And the state was correct. You can take your common sense back there. Two parties have divorced. They're now shifting two children back and forth. Would they have arguments? Certainly. Would they argue over school choice, and medical devices, and child support, and hair colors? Yes. But you're going to hear that once there were now new spouses, there's going to be a family text, a text chain. You'll likely hear there were thousands of messages between Kirsten Bridegan, Jared Bridegan, Mario Fernandez, and Shanna Gardner. You will not hear anyone take the stand, say there were threats of violence, any types of suggestions of violence. They will say both sides at times would say things they maybe regret, cheap shots at one another, little digs, but no violence. There will not be a witness that will take the witness stand. You'll see no evidence that law enforcement was ever called, the Department of Children and Families ever got involved, or that any of them went down to the second floor to domestic relations and filed for an injunction or what you may think of as a restraining order. They weren't perfect, but they made it work. They even had a consent order right up to October of 2021. Now, the state in count 2 of their indictment provides a date range starting November 1st of 2021, leading up to the date of the homicide, February 16th, 2022. There will be no evidence that you will see. We anticipate no evidence whatsoever of anything suggesting that Mario Fernandez has any involvement in the murder of Jared Bridegan. You will see nothing in December giving any suggestion that Mario Fernandez hired, solicited, or had any involvement, desire, or intent for Jared Bridegan to be murdered. I anticipate the state is going to call an FBI agent named Bobby Blythe, and he's going to testify to forensic data. He's a CAST agent, meaning he will take cell phone data and he will try to plot maps with arches and graphs to try to give an idea of where a device is. He will not be able to tell you this is where a person is, but this is where a device connected to that person is. And he'll tell you that a device that's associated with Henry Tenen travels to Jacksonville Beach on January 5th of 2022. You'll likely see a map with little plots, much like you would using your own navigation apps. It'll show him in Jacksonville Beach area. It'll show him travel down by the Jacksonville Beach golf course. He will not go all the way down to where the homicide scene is. He'll briefly go down the road that Shanna Gardner and Mario Fernandez live on, but he will not testify that the device ever stopped at that location. And certainly there will be no evidence, no witness, no data that will be presented to say that Henry Tenen, the murderer, had any communication or connection with Mario Fernandez or Shanna Gardner. Now, Shanna Gardner's name was mentioned at least a dozen times. She's not on trial here. Mario Fernandez is. And the indictment alleges solicitation of Henry Tenen, not Shanna Gardner. You have to be focused on Mario Fernandez. John Biggerstaff. The state actually did a really good job of explaining, kind of stole my thunder, of who John Biggerstaff is. It is correct, and it'll be undisputed, that Mario Fernandez went to school with John Biggerstaff's kids, his daughter and his son. And he's known him for decades. They both served in the military. They stayed friends. They worked out together at John Biggerstaff's house. John Biggerstaff also had a bit of a handyman business. You will not have to take our word for that. Because after this homicide had occurred, law enforcement was investigating Mario Fernandez. They put up what's called pole cameras. And those are exactly what they sound like. Cameras on top of poles used to surveil locations. You will be able to see John Biggerstaff doing work with Mario Fernandez at the Potomac rental property. You will see that legitimate work being done. In fact, it'll be a wet saw where they're doing tile work. Now, John Biggerstaff, who they will want you to believe is the person that provided the firearm in this homicide. John Biggerstaff did own a 10 millimeter. FDLE will come up on the witness stand and tell you they believe it's a Glock 10 millimeter. They'll also tell you that those have been in production since 1991 and that there's 3 models of Glock that's been produced. And he cannot identify which model it was. And Glock is a for-profit business. You'll hear they produced thousands of these firearms. But they're focused on John Biggerstaff's 10 millimeter. He did own one. The ATF did run what's called a firearm trace summary once they looked at John Biggerstaff. And in June of 2016, 6 years prior to the homicide, John Biggerstaff did purchase a 10 millimeter. It's a 40 Gen 4, probably. It's what's called a bear gun. It's generally used for hunting. But later in 2010, as the state mentioned, John Biggerstaff is arrested for a federal felony. And as a result of that, he was required to turn over all of his firearms. Starting in October of 2016 until the day that he dies, you will learn that he cannot possess firearms. It would be a federal and state crime if he were to possess firearms. But how will you know that he didn't have the firearm? Because his son will come in and testify that as a result of those release conditions, he helped fill out a firearms inventory, an affidavit, and I've highlighted number 7 on that affidavit, which will show you a Glock 40 Gen 4 10 millimeter with the serial number BBG L770. Later that year, he becomes a convicted felon. John Biggerstaff will take the witness stand and said he did not possess a firearm. He will also tell you that they offered him immunity, and his statement remains the same. They didn't mention in their opening, but I anticipate you're going to see this evidence, that on January 25th, John Biggerstaff has some Google searches related to a 10 millimeter. He did. He once owned a 10 millimeter. Can't lawfully buy one or possess one, but you need to pay attention to what else he did not search. He did not search how to modify a firearm to throw off an analyst from FDLE on rifling characteristics or tool marks. As mentioned by the state, when these shell casings are ejected from a firearm, that FDLE analyst will tell you, we can tell it's a Glock because of certain markings. You won't see any searches of how to get rid of a firearm, how to stage a robbery for a murder, nothing. What you will see from the same exact day, It's also important to note Mario Fernandez is not there. You'll see that he searched the Windjammer Resort, and the Average Savage, which is a band that apparently plays at that resort. He searches Charleston military bases. He searches 9mm. There's not a 9mm used in this case. You have to go into this with your eyes open and not focused like law enforcement was. You have to open up the aperture. You'll see that he searched locked gun case. You'll hear that John Biggerstaff has struggled with substance abuse and that he had a substance abuse problem during this time period. And I anticipate you'll hear that he hid drugs around his house. He searched his personal injury attorney. You'll have all this in evidence. You'll see that on the same day he searched handmade flour tortillas, certainly don't have anything to do with this case, luxury villas in Italy. You'll find out he doesn't have any money. You have to look at all of the evidence to determine whether the state meets their burden. But that 10mm, where did it go? In 2016, Juan Biggerstaff will come in and testify that after filling out that affidavit, he then loaded 20 firearms into his vehicle. His dad said you can keep 4. Didn't include the 10mm, shotgun, rifle, a couple pistols. He takes them to his sister's house, Stephanie Atkinson, where they remain until she calls and says that she is buying a house. Juan, please come get the guns. He goes and retrieves the guns. He will take the witness stand and tell you, my dad never touched them. Also, he'll tell you, they offered him immunity, but that will be his testimony. Both of these men have been offered full immunity from prosecution in a homicide that has no statute of limitations. And their testimony will be, we have not seen those guns since 2017, because once he picks them up from his sister, he then has them. He's at UNF, Juan Biggerstaff, studying, and he gets recruited to be a police officer in Irvine, Texas. And on his way out of town, with the 16 guns that he doesn't get to keep, he goes to a family friend's house, Fred Martin, takes them in bags and in gun boxes, and puts them in a closet. And both of those men's testimony will be, that is the last time they saw those guns. And the state will want you to believe this is part of some sort of conspiracy. John Biggerstaff has never been arrested. Juan Biggerstaff has never been arrested. They have been offered full immunity from prosecution in a first-degree murder case. And their testimony will be 5 years before the homicide was the last time we saw that gun. And FDLE will say, I cannot say that it's that gun. All I can say is it's 10mm Glock, and there are thousands of them. Agent Blythe will come in and talk about timing advance records. As was mentioned, tracking plots on a map. And Mario goes to Potomac. That is his rental property. There will be no dispute of this. He goes there on January 29th, but you'll find out why he's there. As I mentioned, Henry Tennant, the man allegedly paid for this homicide, apparently can't afford the rent, and as Christina Stifler said, a rundown property on the other side of town. A man hired for a homicide who can't afford his rent is evicted from the property from the man who hired him to commit a homicide, is what they suggest the evidence will show. You will see a copy of the lease agreement between Mario Fernandez and Jeremy Ordway. You can use your own common sense about a landlord going to a property right before a new tenant moves in, and you'll hear testimony about it. And what Agent Blythe will tell you is that studies will suggest, and again, use your own common sense, that most people are within an arm's reach of their cellular device, unless they're sitting on a jury, I suppose. But otherwise, the devices are near them or on them. But the state will try to suggest through the evidence that you'll see that Mario Fernandez travels with Henry Tennant, or I should say Henry Tennant's device, to Nocatee and then out to Jacksonville Beach on what they will likely refer to as a dry run, scoping out the scene in order to plan and premeditate this homicide that Henry Tennant committed. The evidence will show that Mario Fernandez's device is at Potomac. And in fact, Agent Blythe and any other law enforcement officer, they will not be able to say that Henry Tennant and Mario Fernandez actually saw each other, only that their devices were in the general area. But there will be no dispute that Henry Tennant's device travels south down 95, goes to the Nocatee area, the Beacon Lake area, and up to Jacksonville Beach, all while Mario Fernandez's device remains at his rental property. As to whether or not he goes to this rental property often, again, thank God for those poll cameras. You'll see Mario Fernandez countless times at his property, coming and going, tenants coming and going, air conditioning companies coming, him doing work at his property. There will be no dispute of that. Ms. Stifler mentioned that things were not rosy for Shanna Gardner and Mario Fernandez, and in fact, that was the case. You'll hear from administrators and teachers from the school that the twins attended, and they'll testify that, yes, we were told things weren't going great. They'd done some marriage counseling, but things were rocky, and they anticipated getting divorced. They were going to get separated. This was at the beginning of the school year in January of 2022. But what they will also testify to is that Mario Fernandez, in this so-called marriage of convenience, was an active and involved stepfather, that he would attend parent-teacher conferences. And they'll tell you, despite what the state said about this acrimony in this child custody issue, is that it is very common, and they accommodate divorced couples. And they gladly do separate parent-teacher conferences. Not uncommon. This was not a result of just Shanna and Jared having problems. This is something that happens because far too many Americans do get divorced and do have to raise children. But they'll testify that Mario Fernandez helped with homework, school projects, he picked children up, he dropped children off. He was involved. February 15th, the day before the homicide, Mario Fernandez, once again, back to Potomac as he normally does. He is not an absentee landlord. He's involved. It's not a high-profile, wonderful, beautiful house out at the beaches. It's a rental property for lower-income people. And what he would do is go over and do work and try his best to make this property as best as he could. And he would hire people to help him. Henry Tenen will be there and leave. Again, there'll be no evidence submitted to you that there's any type of agreement, contract, solicitation, incitement, encouragement, nothing to suggest that Mario Fernandez has done anything to get Henry Tenen to commit this homicide. Mario Fernandez goes to John Biggerstaff's house. What the state did not tell you, but will be in evidence, is you will actually see why Mario Fernandez was there. You will hear testimony of why Mario Fernandez was there, because 4 days later, Juan Biggerstaff is getting married. He's going to be driving back from Texas with his fiancée on February 16th and getting married on February 19th, and that Mario is going to help with tables and chairs. He drives a truck. Nothing nefarious about it. The state did not mention that in their opening, but the evidence will actually show you that. You'll hear from John and Juan, who will tell you, we've known Mario for decades. He was kind enough to help set up tables and chairs for the wedding that was going to occur 4 days later for a police officer and his new wife. There will be no evidence at all of a firearm or anything to suggest involvement in a homicide. Juan Biggerstaff will walk through that door. John Biggerstaff will walk through that door. They've never been arrested. Their story has always been the same, despite being offered that immunity. The night of the homicide, Agent Blythe will testify that Mario Fernandez's device enters Jacksonville Beach and goes to Marsh Inlet, and there'll be a lot of testimony about that, as to whether or not that device ever left that residence till 9:30 the next morning. Now, ladies and gentlemen, February 16th, 2022. It was a terrible day. There are a lot of people in this courtroom and a lot of people watching. That day destroyed the lives of so many people. We will never, ever say otherwise. What Henry Tenen did that night was unconscionable, and he will be held to account for that at a later date. The state has brought in evidence, giant boots, car keys, jackets of Henry Tenen. He destroyed the life of Jared Bridegan, his wife, his family. He's destroyed the life of Mario Fernandez, who's been accused. There will be no evidence submitted to you that will connect those chains, that he had any involvement in what Henry Tenen did. Jared Bridegan came and picked up his children for his date night. You'll see video of this. It'll be heartbreaking knowing where that ends. He takes the children to a Jacksonville Beach barbecue place called the Bearded Pig. They're there for about 45 minutes. He drives them through Wendy's to get them Frosties. He drops them back off. You'll see videos. You'll watch them walk through the parking lot. And then you're going to also see videos of that blue truck owned by Henry Tennant, which will not be in dispute. These are little snapshots of all those videos that you will see. But what you will not see is Mario Fernandez. You'll see videos of that blue truck driving past people walking down the street. This thing gets blasted over the media. They are looking for any witness they can. There will be no witness, no evidence, nothing to suggest Mario Fernandez is in that truck. What you will see from 7:46 to 9:14, 7:46 is just shortly after dropping the twins off. You'll see the blue truck, as Ms. Stifler said, trying to give some distance. She's driving down 5th Avenue South through Sanctuary, turns into Fairway Lane. And you'll see that black VW Atlas driven by Jared Bridegan with his daughter in the back seat. And you'll see a muzzle flash. And you'll see a figure, which will be Henry Tennant. And you'll see video of him walking all the way from the homicide location down 9th Street, which is South Beach Parkway, and then turns into 9th, all the way down to Shetter, up Shetter, right past the police station. Ms. Stifler talked about coincidences. They do happen. And you know why we know they happened? Because a terrible, ironic fact that you will see is that as Henry Tennant is walking past the police station after this murder, Kirsten Bridegan and I believe her mother show up at the police station. They are caught in the same frame. So ladies and gentlemen, you will see that coincidences do happen. Mario Fernandez can know a wrongdoer and not be a wrongdoer. Ms. Stifler suggested that there's going to be data in this case that Agent Blythe will testify to that will suggest that Mario Fernandez had his cell phone off during the time of the homicide. However, what Agent Blythe is going to testify to is he cannot say that. He can say it's either off, airplane mode, or other. What's happening, timing advance is simply records produced by your cell phone carrier, and what it is to make sure your cell phone works, that you have good signal strength, and it knows when to hand off to another tower. But he's going to read to you a disclaimer from T-Mobile. Even if call records are found, there may be times when no timing advance records are available. Please exercise caution in using these records for investigative or prosecutorial purposes. What Ms. Stifler didn't mention, but the evidence will show, is there were other gaps. 1205 to 1243, and there's going to be a lot of gaps. You'll hear testimony. Mr. Dreiser will cross-examine Agent Blythe. There'll be another expert that will testify. This happens all the time. But the reason 1205 to 1243 will be significant is at 1236, Detective Lamont and Detective Burrell from the Jacksonville Beach Police Department are now under the unfortunate task of notifying next of kin that Jared Bridegan had been killed. They will testify they left Jax Beach Police Department at 1236 and that Marsh Inlet is just a couple blocks down the street. And they show up during one of these gaps. But there's another gap. It happens almost instantaneously. 1205 to 1243 communicates for a second, then right back to 1243 to 1:14 a.m. is what the data will suggest. And why you know Mario Fernandez is there is because those detectives will testify that they were standing right there speaking to him and Shanna Gardner in their house, identified by their driver's license. They weren't called in advance and said, we're on the way. And so when the state will be suggesting that that earlier gap was because Mario Fernandez turned his phone off during the homicide, you will actually have a conflict in the evidence from a detective that's going to say, I looked right at the man and his wife. Cell phone off, or is it simply an engineering gap? And you'll hear testimony, you'll be reminded of that disclaimer that they're not to be used for investigative and prosecutorial purposes, because sometimes they just don't exist. As Ms. Stifler mentioned, during the same time period, the scene is being processed. I anticipate you're going to hear from evidence technician Jarman from Jacksonville Beach, who's going to say, we're out there, we're collecting anything, we're putting placards on the ground. That's going to be in these boxes. You're going to take them back into the deliberation room. You'll be able to look at the shell casings, everything. They did find evidence that night of Henry Tennant. You're going to hear they found DNA on the tire placed in the road of Henry Tennant, not of Mario Fernandez. They swabbed everything. You're going to hear, in fact, we asked them to swab something. We have no burden. But we asked them at our own peril to swab something they found that wasn't tested, and there was no evidence of Mario Fernandez. No physical evidence, no witnesses, no videos. You'll be shocked how many videos you will see. They went door to door to door to door, getting every ring camera, every surveillance camera. They went to the Beach's hospital to look at their cameras. They scoured everywhere they could for any video they could find, and they never once saw Mario Fernandez. The state will want you to believe during that gap that somehow he evaded every camera that nobody could possibly know where they are, but was never, ever seen. There's not a fingerprint, a hair, DNA, nothing, other than the killer, Henry Tennant. As I mentioned, the detectives go at 12:36. During one of those timing advance gaps, they'll testify that as trained law enforcement officers, again, you can use your own experience. They do patrol. Now they're detectives. One will be a corporal. They're trained to look at observations. They'll testify to the observations they made. They'll also testify to the lack of observations they made. Nothing of any evidentiary value occurred when they went to that residence, other than Shanna Gardner crying about having to tell her children and Mario Fernandez being present right there when that information is being disclosed. They will not testify that he hid in the back room. They will not testify that he was sweating profusely 4 hours after this homicide that he's supposed to be the mastermind of. They will give you no observations, other than we showed up, they were there, they answered the door. And yes, later that day, Mario Fernandez does what he said he was going to do. He goes to John Biggerstaff's house to help with the wedding. And you'll hear that from those witnesses. You'll hear that Mario Fernandez and Shanna Gardner go in for a voluntary interview. As the state said, there were deletions of Google information. They won't tell you what it is. They want it to be some sort of evidence of a homicide, but you can use your own common sense, your own experience. They'll testify, it could be deleting spam emails. It could be deleting pictures. It could be anything, but we can't tell you what it is. You have to look at this with your eyes wide open and use your own common sense. The state did not mention this in their opening, but I anticipate, will make some sort of feature about this. Is that after the interview, Mario Fernandez goes on a road trip to Pennsylvania. But what you're going to hear is that he went with his truck, with his tag, with his cell phone, with his credit cards. The state was correct. He had access to a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. There was no restriction on his travel. He could have gone right up the road to Jacksonville International Airport and fled the country. That's not what the evidence will show. So he drove north. He stopped, saw a buddy of his that he plays online video games with. You'll hear testimony how they communicate over their headsets and sit in their gaming chairs, and they talk. They went out to dinner at Ruby Tuesdays. They did not talk about hide me from the police, switch cars with me, give me some cash, help me. No, they talked about trucks, video games, and work. They went to bed early because one of them had to get up early for work. Mario Fernandez carried on. He went to Walmart, he went to McDonald's, he used his cell phone, he used his credit card. They'll produce all that in evidence. It will not be evidence of a man running from the law. Several days later, he drives back. Straight route to Jacksonville. Right back to Jacksonville Beach, to his home that he shares with his wife, a couple blocks from the police station. And again, there will be no evidence that he's trying to disguise himself, hide his location, or anything. He goes right back to where the police came to see him the very first time. And then on March 9th, they released to the media the blue truck, blasted everywhere. Every news station, social media, every law enforcement officer in North Florida is looking for this blue truck. You'll see the videos of it driving through Jacksonville Beach. Then they start to look for the 10 millimeter. The state suggested that they looked everywhere. They went to a pawn shop in Jacksonville Beach. They went to Beach's Pawn on 3rd Street. They found 6 transactions. For a gun that's not supposed to be that common, at a pawn shop, they found 6 of them. Henry Tennant was also going to a pawn shop. Guess what they didn't do at that pawn shop, which was look for a 10 millimeter. They did not expand this search. They looked in Jacksonville Beach, and they looked at Mario Fernandez. Because as the state tried to say, who else would have the motive to do this? They don't know who's driving the truck. They don't know who actually solicited Henry Tennant. There'll be no evidence to suggest they do. It took them 30 minutes to get to Henry Tenen in their opening. Payments. They want you to believe that Henry Tenen was hired on credit. That a man that doesn't have two nickels to rub together, he makes $15,000 a year breaking down wooden pallets. He's evicted from the property that Mario Fernandez, the guy that's supposed to have hired him, they're going to suggest that he's been paid. He does get paid. He gets paid in the form of checks, 2 checks on the same day. One for landscaping, one for roof work. Boy, thank God for those poll cams. Because as much as the state wanted to say that this property just wasn't nice, didn't mean work didn't get done. And you're actually going to hear a recorded phone call that I'll get to in a moment that will actually hear Mario, not even knowing that he's being recorded, commenting on how good of a day laborer Henry Tenen is, and that this was during COVID, and that called out a contractor to take down a tree, and they wanted to charge $3,000 for one tree. You'll hear the phone call. It'll be in evidence, and you can listen to it in the back between 2 people who didn't know they were being recorded. Man, Henry Tenen is a workhorse. That guy tilled up the front yard, chopped down trees. You'll actually see video of him unloading tile from the back of his truck at Potomac doing work. And my law partner was nice enough to get up and grab a piece of evidence that you're going to have back there, which is a journal found in the truck of Henry Tenen. And the state said, oh, well, there's a check and it says Kickstarter. Good luck. But we didn't find a Kickstarter account. Kickstarter just means that somebody's giving money to help kickstart somebody's business. Henry Tenen is a worker. Mario Fernandez has hired him to do work, not murder, tree work, roof work, landscaping, tile work. You're going to have Mr. Tenen's business plan because he wanted to be his own boss. You'll hear from his girlfriend. You'll hear from other people that say Henry wanted to start his own business. He wanted to do his own pallet business. He was tired of working for somebody else. He wanted to work for himself. And he wrote out a business plan that you'll be able to take back there and go through page by page with prices and what he anticipates his revenue to be. Mario Fernandez, who had at the time access to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, gave money to a guy that had helped him around his own house and invest in his business that he wanted to start. That's what the checks say. That's what the poll cameras will show. You'll never see any tie to a homicide. And after that last check, you'll never see any other payments. They want you to believe that the evidence is going to show he got hired on credit and took 3 checks. They were hiding in plain sight. Mario Fernandez's name is on the check. The business, the LLC he has with his wife is at the top. It's got his account number. It's written to Henry Tenen. It's a contract for work, not for homicide. Mario Fernandez, Shanna Gardner go in for a second voluntary interview, and Mario Fernandez provides his DNA voluntarily. There's a jacket you can't see over in the corner. There's these boots down here. There's keys over here. Everything beautifully put in these boxes. They'll be great for Henry Tenen's trial. They have no relevance whatsoever for you to consider the elements in which you have to decide to see if the state has overcome their burden, because nothing on these connects to Mario Fernandez. Mario Fernandez could probably fit half his body in those boots. They will have no evidence to suggest it has anything to do with Mario Fernandez and the homicide of Jared Bridegan. Henry Tenen gets pulled over, as they said, it was for investigative purposes. He gets arrested for driving on a suspended license. They find an old rusty shotgun in the trunk of the car. Has nothing to do with the homicide, but as they said, Henry Tenen's a convicted felon. He goes to jail. They go to Potomac. They notify Mr. Ordway that Henry Tenen has been arrested in connection to a homicide. They search Potomac. These are photographs from evidence technicians. You'll be able to look at them. How they determine these are the boots, that's for you guys to figure out, because you're going to see all sorts of different things they recovered from that residence, including the lease agreement between Jeremy Ordway and Mario Fernandez, signed on January 27th, when Henry Tenen, the so-called paid-for murderer, is getting evicted from the home of the guy that the state wants you to believe is paying him to commit a murder. Then the truck is recovered. There were likely a lot of high fives on that day. 2 ATF agents recovered this truck. This wasn't just a family friend of Henry Tenen. There's a man named Jimmy Jones. And this property is not owned by Mario Fernandez. It is not a rental property owned by Mario Fernandez. There will be no evidence to suggest that Mario Fernandez has ever been to that property at all. They talked to this man. He said, oh man, Henry, he rolled this thing up into my yard, said the timing chain was broke, don't work anymore. A man hired for a homicide apparently couldn't afford to fix his own truck, and it's sitting in the backyard. They get a search warrant to recover the truck out of the backyard. But the evidence will suggest they didn't need to get the search warrant because Jimmy Jones said, sure guys, go in the backyard, you're welcome to get it. Hey, if y'all want to search my house, feel free to do it. They have now found the truck used in the murder of Jared Bridegan, and they do not have a firearm. Guess what they did not do? They did not search the property. They didn't go in despite having consent. They'll say, well, we didn't have a search warrant. You don't need a search warrant. Law enforcement will tell you if they have consent, they can go right in. And that consent can be revoked at any time. Jimmy Jones said, guys, come on in. He said, did Henry get caught up in a shooting? And yet they decided not to go look for that 10 millimeter in the very location that they found the truck with a guy who did not call law enforcement and say, I've seen this truck all over the news. It's in my backyard. But what you're also going to hear, and why it's significant, is when FDLE takes the witness stand, that agent will tell you on July 30th, just a couple weeks ago, we're still getting evidence. He produces a report identifying the firearm used as being a Glock, has 4 names listed on that report: Henry Tenen, Shanna Gardner, Mario Fernandez, and Jimmy Jones. This was not a good investigation. Ms. Stifler was right. It was by officers who were not experienced in homicide investigations. They will tell you they were learning on the job. We'll never know what is inside that house. So when they say, oh, I wish we could have got the gun, maybe we could have exonerated the idea of it being Mr. Biggerstaff's gun, there were opportunities. They only looked where they wanted to look. And they did not look in a house that they were given consent to look. They recover the truck. They take it to Jacksonville Beach. They're going to tell you they didn't even want to keep it in their garage. It was so disgusting. So if your mind is, well, maybe the truck was scrubbed and that's why they didn't find any evidence, it's what the state will want you to believe. They're going to tell you it was so disgusting that when they pulled items like this book out, they would shake it and there would be things from rodents, from bugs. And it was disgusting. And they vacuum it with special vacuums, with special filters, looking for hairs and DNA. Mario Fernandez isn't like me. He's got a head full of hair. They didn't find one hair, one fingerprint, DNA, skin cell, anything. Nothing related to Mario Fernandez. The active wiretap I mentioned, you're going to hear it. A witness named Carlos Fong, he goes by Sonny. He's a friend of Mario Fernandez. He sees on the news about this homicide. And it was Shanna Gardner's ex-husband. You're going to hear these recordings. Oh my God. Yeah, me and Shanna, getting separated. It's terrible. He's going to say, yeah, I still drive the truck. Oh, it's a nice truck. They talk a lot about trucks and why he likes his Toyota. Talks about his dogs. And why I mention the dogs is because the trip to Pennsylvania, the state will likely make a big deal of. He didn't take his beloved dogs. And you'll hear on the phone call, man, my dog has outlived his life expectancy. But I tell you, when I get him up and moving, he's great. And he also talks about Henry Tenen. Man, you know Henry Tenen? He doesn't distance himself because, yeah, guy did all sorts of work for me. Chopping down trees and tilling up the front yard and doing landscaping. He was a workhorse. You'll hear the phone call of 2 people that did not know they were being recorded. They eventually search Mario's vehicle. They seize his phone. No evidentiary value. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as I started this opening, as you started your jury selection and you heard the indictment being read, the state of Florida has the sole and exclusive burden to prove each of these elements. Element 1 will not require any proof. And I should take a moment and tell you, there's going to be lots of witnesses called in this case, specifically to do what the state is required to do, which is an order of proof. Unfortunately, they have to prove that Jared Bridegan is dead. So when there are witnesses that take this stand, and Judge Kite looks over and says, Mr. Hill, Mr. Dreiser, any cross-examination, and we say no, trust me, we could get up and talk for hours and ask all sorts of questions, but you've devoted 3 weeks of your life to answering these questions. So if we do not get up and ask questions, it's because there is no evidentiary value for answering these questions for Mario Fernandez. We will not need to ask questions of the really kind citizens that comforted that little girl in the back seat. We will not have to ask questions of the law enforcement officers trying to give CPR. We certainly will not have to ask questions of the medical examiner who determined the death of Jared Bridegan. When we do ask questions, we ask that you pay attention. And I know you will. You've committed so much to this. The only questions you have to answer is not, was this a terrible night that has scarred so many people? You have to answer these questions, which is that the death was caused by the criminal act of Mario Enrique Fernandez-Saldana, whether or not it was premeditated killing of Jared Bridegan. You will certainly find that Henry Tenen did exactly that. They will show you all that evidence. But you will have to determine whether or not Mr. Fernandez intended for that murder to occur, and whether he did some act or said something that was intended to and that did incite, cause, encourage, assist, or advise the other person, Henry Tenen, or others to commit this crime. They don't have to prove he was there, but they have to prove those two elements, both of them, in order to convict him. As to criminal solicitation, the burden rests at this table to prove that Mario Fernandez-Saldana solicited Henry Tenen, the murderer, to commit an offense to which first-degree murder, and that during the solicitation that Mario Enrique Fernandez-Saldana commanded, encouraged, hired, requested Henry Tenen to engage in specific conduct which would constitute the commission of first-degree murder. That is their burden, to prove beyond and to the exclusion of a reasonable doubt. And the judge will read you this instruction. You will carry it with you back there. We talked about it in jury selection. The defendant has entered a plea of not guilty. This means you must presume or believe the defendant is innocent right now. Innocent. This presumption stays with the defendant as to each material allegation in the indictment through each stage of this trial, unless it has been overcome by the evidence to the exclusion and beyond a reasonable doubt. To overcome the defendant's presumption of innocence, the state has the burden of proving the crime with which the defendant is charged was committed, and the defendant is the person who committed the crime. The law does not require proof beyond all doubt on the part of the jury before it returns a verdict of guilty. A mere possible, speculative, imaginary, or forced doubt is not a reasonable doubt. A reasonable doubt is not a guess or mere conjecture. Rather, it is based upon the reasoning, common sense, after careful consideration, impartial consideration of all the evidence in this case. A reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the defendant may arise from the evidence, conflict in the evidence, or the lack of evidence. If, after careful and impartial consideration of all the evidence, you have a reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the accused, it is your duty to find him not guilty. On the other hand, if after careful and impartial consideration of all the evidence, you are convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty, it is your duty to find the defendant guilty. It is to the evidence introduced at trial and to it alone you are to look for that proof. You have to be convinced that he did each element of each charge. Otherwise, as you stated in jury selection, it is your duty, it is the law that you would return a verdict of not guilty. Ladies and gentlemen, you have paid attention to me, you've paid attention to the state, you sacrificed all last week. In the next 2 weeks, we don't want to waste any more of your time. Thank you so much for your attention, and we look forward to